Thank you very much for coming to join me today in this lecture. 184 years ago, Joseph Nieps came to England with his invention of photography, which was called helography, and he tried to present his inventions to the Royal Society. Through the research for the conference, Professor Larry Scharf proved that sadly Nieps was not able to present his invention to the committee, but he did meet informally some of the members of the Royal Society. So it's quite moving to stand here today and speak on Nieps' behalf about his inventions. So Joseph Nieps was a Frenchman, an inventor, who came over to England in 1827. Originally he was from Chalon-sur-Saône, and he invented he worked with his brother to invent the combustion engine. He also worked on dyes for Napoleon's uniforms and also made improvements to the bicycle. But from 1816 he worked on the invention of photography, trying to fix an image. And so in Bradford, we are very lucky to have three of his early inventions of his process in the collection of the National Media Museum, which was came into the collection via the Royal Photographic Society. So it's thanks to that collection coming to Bradford in 2002 that we have these wonderful specimens from the early inventions of photography that we could analyse. A little bit of background before we look at the inventions and research results. I'd like to speak to you a little bit about the history of the collection in Bradford, and also the collaborative project between the National Media Museum and the Getty Conservation Institute. The team responsible for the project consists of scientists from the Getty Conservation Institute, curators and conservators, and it's just a fantastic project to bring those specialisms together. And this is the team working in Bradford. Lots of debate and discussion over everything that we analyse and discuss goes on an annual basis in Bradford, and the project started in 2006. So to tell you a little bit of the history of the National Media Museum, this is the museum as it stands today. I don't know if any of you have been to visit, but I hope...
Absolutely.
Oh. Well, I do hope after the lecture you will come and look at the collection, because it's an...
I'm a great photographer, so that...
Oh. Well, that's a wonderful exhibition that highlights the collection. We do have a world-famous collection in Bradford, and I think perhaps not too many people appreciate that it's way up there with international collections. The actual beginnings of museums and collections stems from the Great Exhibition of 1851, and from the charter that was made after the Great Exhibition, the South Kensington Museum was opened in London. From the South Kensington Museum led to a split into the Science Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum by 1909. The museum in Bradford is a part of the family of museums from the Science Museum. There's the Science Museum, the National Media Museum and the Railway Museum in York, who are a body of collections. In the 1970s, there was a real push to form a national collection, and events such as Sue Davis and the Photographers Gallery opening. Colin Ford became Keeper of Photography and Film at the National Gallery, and Barry Lane became representative for photography in the Arts Council. And so everyone was thinking that a national collection was needed, and it was the Science Museum that made the first move with the director, Dame Margaret Weston, to decide to create the museum in Bradford. It's quite nice that the location of the museum is on the site of Prince's Theatre, which was one of the first sites to show the moving image in Bradford. So Wardley House was the venue where the museum was going to be constructed, and it opened in 1983. We opened with the title National Museum of Photography. Shortly after became Film and Television, and then recently with an additional remit to our collecting policy of radio, new media and web, we've become the National Media Museum. And so just to quickly give you an overview of that terrific collection in Bradford, it's housed in Inside, which is a wonderful research centre, where you can come and view the material and research or loan for your exhibitions. And within the collection there are many individual collections, so I'll just name a few for you today. We have the William Henry Fox Talbot collection that was transferred from Laycock Abbey, and that is a wonderful material on Talbot and his circle of friends. This is an example of the pencil of nature in that collection. The collecting policy originally, the remit was the science of photography, so the collection is absolutely rich in early processes, daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, carte de visites, cabinet cards, all from leading practitioners and in beautiful conditions. And to go with the images, we often have the technology to make those images. So there's William Henry Fox Talbot's mousetrap camera there. We have a beautiful album by Julia Margaret Cameron, the Herschel album, that was saved for the nation in 1974 by Mr. Colin Ford, who's sitting in the audience. It was saved and kept for the National Gallery and then Portrait Gallery, and then it was transferred to Bradford when Bradford opened. We have the Kodak Museum, which came to Bradford in 1984. Which represents the early popular photography, snapshot photography and amateur photography. And then we also have the Daily Herald Archive, which was founded in 1911 and runs through to the 1960s, where it was transferred to Rupert Murdoch and became the Sun, and we no longer collected that archive. And finally, to the Royal Photographic Society, and it was with this collection in 2002 that the Nieps plates came to the collection. It's absolutely beautiful collection, mainly pictorial material. The Royal Photographic Society stems from the Photography Society of London that was founded in 1853, but it was John Dudley Johnson in the 1920s where the collection grew into an absolutely world-famous collection, 250,000 pieces of iconic material. And so, combined with the National Media Museum collection, you can appreciate how rich our material is now with those two collections sitting side by side. And so, with that collection in mind, we are the ideal venue to have a collaborative project with the Getty Conservation Institute. The aim of this project is to make a signature of every single photographic process that existed. So analysing everything, identifying everything, and their variants. So the Getty scientists come and work with us on a yearly basis to analyse the collection. This is made possible by this laboratory that they've invented. There are two pieces of equipment which fit into these two cases, and they're able to carry these around the world to the collections. The main thing about this is it's safe for the material. We don't have to move the material to the equipment because the equipment comes to us. We set it up in the archive. It takes about 40 minutes to set up, and then we're ready to go, ready to analyse all this fantastic material. It consists of an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer, which looks at the inorganic components of a photograph, such as platinum or gold. And it also has an infrared spectrometer, which looks at the organic materials, such as albumin, and also any of the varnishes that the photographers used. So perhaps beeswax would show up. I'll just give you 3 examples before we get onto the nieps material of the sort of information that we are able to get from the equipment. And as curators, it's wonderful because it helps us have more authority about our collections. Photographic processes are notoriously difficult to identify, but now with the equipment, there's no questions. So, for example, this beautiful print of Coburn by Fanny Coburn, it is a mercury tone platinum print, which was confirmed for us, and it's coated with beeswax. So we're able to catalogue, display, interpret and conserve our collections more correctly and with more authority after our research. The team was really excited when we found this photograph that claimed it was the very first vanadium photograph, but sadly when we analysed it, it was just simply a salt print. So amongst the successes, there are the disappointments. And finally, for conservation, a spot test of this Paul Martin print of Dan Leno was unsatisfactory to what the coating or the print was, but with analysis we realised it was just a gelatin print, so we were able to conserve and remove the tape from the corner. So I hope you see how useful all the analysis is, but then we decided just want this example, along with the beautiful material and the iconic images, such as these carbons of Julie Margaret Cameron up there and Joseph Swan. We also have all the ephemera, the data from the autotype companies and how carbon tissues are made. So, along with the actual prints, we can provide all the ephemera to go with that research, which really thrills the scientists because the Royal Photographic Library is so superb. And so where better place to start with our project for analysing photography than Nieps's process, which we just happen to have 3 in the collection. Nieps came to England and he brought several of these plates, 4 of which are known to be 3 in England and 1 at the Harry Ransom Centre at Texas in Austin. The other plates, the provenance has been followed, but we're not going to discuss those today. The background to the scientists, Dr. Dusan Stulik and Art Kaplan, was very useful in this process because they'd analysed the first photograph that is in Texas. This is always claimed as the first photograph because it was taken in camera. The 3 photographs held in Bradford were actually made by contact printing, which we wanted one of ours to be made in camera, but sadly we proved by tracing the original prints that they're by contact printing. But the scientists had analysed this print, so they knew the signature of a heliograph, and so they hoped to find something different in Bradford, not just 3 heliographs. So the process began. So we had to make a decision to deframe one of our plates, 2 of them, the Cardinal and the Christ carrying his cross, had previously been taken out of their frames, but Un Clair de Lune, moonlight, was in its frame and seemed to have never been disturbed. So there was a huge decision to take it out of the frame in order to do comparable analysis. So just that day when they were naked and exposed on the table was really quite exciting, and they did look visually quite different out of the frame. So our excitement was growing. So we're going to just play a short video about the actual analysis.
In our research, we have studied several plates, 3 of them which are in National Media Museum in Bradford, and 1 which is in HRC collection in Austin, Texas. Each of those plates is a little bit different, and each of them is very interesting, and each of them gives a little bit different angle on early history of photography, and also on the methodology which Nieps was using when researching photography. What we are trying to do in our project is to really understand how those Nieps plates, which we have in the collection of National Media Museum, were made. We are trying to get as much information through non-contact scientific investigation. But we also have to understand the most important part of the photographic process, which is the image layer. To understand the image layer, we have to do some analysis to look for organic materials which were used, but also for microstructure of that image layer. And for that, we are using high-power stereo microscope, which allows us to really get close to the surface. We can see different structures on the surface. We are trying to understand how the image was formed, if the image is continuous or it's made of spots or some other elements of the image which you cannot see through your eyes. We can get information about it, and we are trying to make understanding how those images have been made. So we were looking at all those grooves to see if there is any deposit of ink. Right. There is absolutely nothing. You would expect it to see in the grooves, which we don't see. So this is completely clean.
Right. So it was never inked up. So this isn't ink.
No, that's not ink. If you look at it closely, you see this is the surface of the plate, which was etched. So you see grains of metal, but not deposit of ink.
I see, right.
And what makes it really interesting is there are some grooves, but those are later damage of the plate. This is not tooled. So this is where you would expect the mechanical tool or pushing. We can say definitely it hasn't been mechanically altered. It was, done photochemically, and it was etched, but whatever was etched hasn't been improved or enhanced by mechanical tools. So no hand touched the surface.
Up until this point, no one's really ever investigated the frames that we used for the Nieps photographs. It does shed additional light onto the way that these Nieps produced these photographs, and also the way that they were subsequently transported around and presented. The frames haven't been examined in any detail in the past, but now that this project has come about between the Getty Conservation Institute and the National Media Museum, it provides us with a perfect opportunity to examine the frames in more detail. One of the things that the frame conservator has shed light on is that we have here a mixture of English and French frames. The way they were able to distinguish them as being French and English was that in the case of the French frame, it's got these crossbars on the corner, and there's also a coloured residue under the gilding which would indicate that the origin of the frame is French. Plus, it's also made from lime. The English one is a different construction. The indication, also from the style as well, is the date of this one would be about right for when Nieps made the original plate. The date of this one would be correct for when it was exhibited, when it was purchased in England later.
When we took some of those plates out of their frames, which were for the first time naked, we have discovered fingerprints on edges of the plates. This is a very special moment on the plate. Those fingerprints etched into the back of the plate might be fingerprints of the first photographer, the first fingerprints of the first photographer ever recorded.
That's absolutely amazing.
What it means to us, or that maybe we have some kind of connection with the hands and mind of the first photographer. The fact that somebody was touching those plates, and the fact that those plates could be touched by the first photographer ever, is very exciting and bring the whole process to some kind of human or person-to-person level. We feel, whole team, we really feel when studying those fingerprints, personal connection with the first photographer, with Nieps.
This project started 4 years ago, and the amount of material we've been able to take a look at and the interesting observations we've been able to see has just been incredible. And the easy part is why Bradford. I mean, they have one of the most interesting collections of photography, one of the most amazing collections of early photographic history in the world. I mean, between the collection of the Media Museum and the RPS collection, there isn't a better place to go to study early photographic processes. And the beauty of this collection here is that they have 3 additional Nieps plates, which is incredible. So we've really been interested in taking a look at those plates and the processes, since he really is the inventor of photography. So what we have here is an X-ray fluorescence spectrometer. The beauty of this instrument is the analysis we do is non-destructive, meaning we don't have to sample the material, and that none of the material gets destroyed during the analysis. But it's also non-contact, meaning we never even have to come in contact with the material we're analyzing. And what the instrument does is it emits a beam of X-rays which excite the material in the sample, and when that material de-excites, it releases radiation that's picked up by the instrument and sorted based on its energy. And depending on at what energy we collect that signature, we can identify the element present in the material. On screen here I have a spectrum of one of the plates that we looked at. In this case, it's the Christ bearing the cross plate. And right away on the spectrum you can see the peaks are identified. So each peak is sorted based on its energy, and then the relative heights of the peak tell you relatively the amount of material of each element. So in this case we have primarily tin in these plates, but we also have small additions of copper and lead. And what we can tell from the analysis is that these are pewter plates. These are the first time these plates have been scientifically analyzed to definitely determine that they are pewter, and what kind of pewter it is, that it's pewter that's composed of tin, copper, and lead.
Our research has been very successful, and we have tremendous amount of material to take back to Los Angeles, compare all the results, and really learn details of everything what we have done during our stay in Bradford.
So I hope that's given you a really good insight into the project and the scientists and how we work on a yearly basis in Bradford, and I think they explained the equipment really nicely on that video. So before we talk about the results, I just return to Nieps himself and his visit to England. So he came in 1827 hoping to bring his invention to the Royal Society and also the Royal Society of Art, and he tried to meet up with lots of eminent gentlemen in the scientific world that would help him and listen to his inventions. And Dr. Larry Scharf did research into the events and sort of studied why Nieps wasn't successful in presenting his invention to the Royal Society and the background behind that. So I'd like to give credit to Larry for this information. So he says, "It is sadly true that Nieps died, an unrecognised genius, posthumously yielding virtual all credit to Daguerre in 1839. But it is far less true that he failed in Britain and that his British friends failed him." Originally, Claude was staying in Hammersmith near Kew. Claude was Nieps's brother who was ill in health, and is one of the reasons why Nieps came to England to see the health of his brother. So Nieps and his wife settled in Kew with a family called the Cussells, and they introduced Nieps to William Townsend Ayton. He was the royal gardener and was really respected by King George III. He was an art collector himself, and he was really well placed to introduce Nieps to various personalities. Unfortunately, Nieps introduced his process to Ayton as an extension of printing processes, lithography, for example, and he didn't sort of say it was a wonderful new invention of capturing nature, so I think he failed in making it sort of an exciting new invention. He presented it as a printing process. Ayton introduced Nieps to Francis Bower. He was an Australian botanical illustrator, and he was based in Kew, and he was really highly sought after for his illustrations of botanical specimens. And so Bower would have really acknowledged the potential of what Nieps had brought to England, these plates of capturing images. In the story of Nieps, Bower is very, very important, because when Arago introduced Daguerre as the inventor of photography in France in 1939 with the daguerreotype process, he completely failed to mention Nieps. And so Bower, back in England, wrote to the Literary Gazette saying that it was Nieps who came to England with early specimens, and I have these, and so Nieps actually began to be recognised in the history of photography thanks to his connection with Bower. So I think this is where Larry Scharf is correct in saying we did help. He did come to England, and he did leave some of his finest specimens with us. And he was hoping to speak to the members of the Royal Society, and at the time the president was Sir Humphrey Davy, and he was interested in photography, and he knew of Wedgwood's experiments, and also Sir John Herschel. He was the secretary here, and he of course invented hypo, fixer of photography, so both those two gentlemen would have been very impressed with Nieps's invention had it been presented to them. There was Sir George Children, who was connected with the British Museum, and he immediately embraced photography when it was announced in 1839. And of course he's linked with Talbot when he presented his findings at the Royal Society in January 1939. The Foreign Secretary was Thomas Young, and he was a physicist who contributed to unlocking the secrets of hieroglyphics. And then William Hyde Wolverston, who was Vice President. He had invented the camera lucida for drawing, and in 1804 he published an analysis of various materials that were sensitive to light. It was in fact his lens that Nieps used for some of his photography, so his interest in Nieps would have been very strong. But sadly, the reason why Nieps seems to have been unsuccessful is even if they had met and been impressed by his invention, sadly so many of them died. Nieps left England in 28, and you'll see there were very few years between Nieps leaving England when all those personalities sadly had died, apart from Bower, who did go on to promote Nieps. One of the really important things about the plates in Bradford is we do know the provenance, and that's very, very important within photography, as you'll appreciate. So we've always been able to trace back where our prints have been from Nieps leaving them as a gift with Bower. So there's a succession of auctions. Francis Bower left the prints to John Brown. Robert Brown, and he was a botanist and worked at the British Museum. He had the plates really as his own artefacts, and he didn't really exhibit them or publicise them. And Brown, on his death, left the plates to John Joseph Bennett in 1858, and he again worked for the British Museum. Again, he didn't publicise them or exhibit them, but he took care of them, and so the condition of the plates and their whereabouts has always been identified. Bennett's wife sold Bennett's artefacts at a sale in Tunbridge Wells, and it was at that sale that the eminent photographer H.P. Robinson bought our plates. And on his death in 1901, he left the plates to his son Ralph Winwood Robinson, and this connection then starts with the Royal Photographic Society. John Dudley Johnson became the curator in 1923, and he really raised the profile of collecting at the Royal Photographic Society. And he approached Robinson's son, Ralph, and asked for Robinson's prints to be donated to the Royal Photographic Society. And it was with that donation that the Nieps plates were actually transferred into the Royal Photographic Collection. Not really part of the collecting policy, because it was more about art and pictorialism, so not really the science. So some of those Nieps plates, particularly the Moonlight, actually resided on the wall in the curator's office. It wasn't sort of part of the collection. And then there is a sort of twist in the history of the Nieps plates with the Science Museum. If you remember, our museum, National Media Museum, is part of the Science Museum. Well, as soon as the RPS acquired the plates, they loaned them to the Science Museum, to the historic collection permanent display. They loaned the Christ and the Cardinal, but the Moonlight print remained at the Royal Photographic Society. And the collaboration continued over the years, and there was the centenary exhibition in 1938 where the plates were exhibited. You can actually see them in this front case. So they were on loan actually to the Science Museum for 52 years, and then they were returned to the Royal Photographic Society in 1977. And then when the Royal Photographic Society was transferred to Bradford in 2002, the Nieps have come back to us permanently for the collection. So they've been on quite a journey since Nieps left them in England. And so the analysis began. We invited many experts to come and help us in identifying different elements of the Nieps plates to help us authenticate and date all the material around the actual plates and the process. So we invited people such as Peter Bauer, who's actually sitting in the audience. He came and looked at the paper components of the frames. Isabella Cocoum from the National Gallery looked at the frames. And Philip Gilhooly came, a forensic expert, to look at the fingerprints. So we invited lots of experts to come and help us with the further analysis. But of course, the main exciting news that we were trying to determine was whether they were heliographs, whether they were all three the same process. Everyone assumed that they would be, but scientific research proved differently. Now, heliograph is basically bitumen of Judea, which is light sensitive and hardens. And most of the heliographs in France, for example, are thought to be made with bitumen of Judea, and so was our Cardinal d'Amboise. I'll just briefly explain the process. I won't go into all the make it too technical, but there would be an original artwork or drawing, and then an engraving of the original artwork would be varnished to make it transparent, like a negative. It would then be laid onto a sensitised plate, which was bitumen of Judea. and it would have been exposed for many hours to light, and then the bitumen would have been removed by the oil of lavender and kerosene, and then the whole plate would have been placed into acid and etched. The area where the bitumen hadn't hardened with light would be etched, and you would get an engraving plate. And then you would ink that up and put it in a press, and you'd get an ink engraving, such as the pull at the end here. And that is the heliographic process, basically, that we were looking for. And the scientists had identified bitumen of Judea and could recognise that on a plate. One of the other points we found out about our plate, as the video said, there was no tooling by an engraver on our plate. It was a pure plate. And we sort of felt perhaps Nieps brought one of his most perfect examples to England, and there was no example of ink on that plate anywhere, so he hadn't used it, and maybe he was going to make a print for the Royal Society if he got the chance, prove to them how his printing plate would work. So the second plate we looked at was the Christ, and again this was made with bitumen of Judea. There was evidence on there, but it had never been put into an acid bath for so long. It was simply immerged, and it was very, very slightly etched. It was never meant to be inked up like a printing plate. It was meant to remain a one-off unique image, almost like a daguerreotype. So that's a sort of priceless, beautiful photograph in itself. It's not a printing plate. There's some close-up views. One of the sad results from the research was we were unable to locate the original print from which this plate was made. So if any of you know where this Christ print may be, that would be a wonderful addition to our research. And then finally, the most exciting news was when we opened in Clair de Lune Moonlight. As you can see from the back of the frame, it hadn't been opened, it hadn't been removed, or so we hoped. So we took away the paper, and the plate was exposed for the first time. And under analysis, we found that the print was made with the resin from the oil of lavender. There was no bitumen of Judea anywhere on the plate. And if you're ever able to come and visit us in Bradford, it is an absolutely beautiful image that sort of works a little bit like a daguerreotype when you hold it in your hand. This print was taken, this is another really twist here, the original artwork was actually by Daguerre. A print was made from it by an engraver called Millet, who worked in France and in England. And this was varnished up to make it translucent before being placed on the plate. And Jean-Louis Marinier is a leading expert on nieps, and he originally located that varnished print in the Cinématographe in Paris. So I went along to make sure that this varnished print did actually correspond to our plate, and one of the key components to help me was the pinprick at the top, and it did match exactly with our plate when measured. So when it was contact printed, those two holes came together. So that was very exciting. It had been catalogued previously for different dimensions, but when I measured it, it was exactly the same. So that was really exciting moment for us. And so, just to add to the scientist Art Kaplan, he investigated the substrates of the plates and revealed that they were pewter. So for the first time we knew they were definitely pewter plates. And in all the writings and letters by Nieps, he did start to use pewter in 1826. So we have a sort of start date for our process. And on the back of the plate there was a pewterer's mark, which was Les Simon, who worked in Paris, and he obviously supplied Nieps with his plates. And Nieps had made plaques for music over the years, so it was a sort of really obvious move for him to use those plaques for his research. And so, to add to our excitement over the 3 new processes in Bradford, we wanted to look at the frames and the papers and just authenticate those dates as well. So Peter Bauer came along and looked at the papers that were associated with the Moonlight frame. Susie Clark had removed all the papers so that Peter could examine them under transmitted light, and it was much easier for him to see the fibres and how the papers were made. So on the back of the Christ plate there were 2 papers, a backing paper and a label. And Peter was able to tell us that this was 1820s French paper made of 2 different types of fibres. But that was wonderful to know because it fitted in with all the dating of the plate. He was also able to confirm that the label that had been put onto the back of the frame by Bauer was 1820s British writing paper. And also there were fillets within the frame which Peter dated as 1820s French. And as you can imagine, much to our horror, when we took the paper off, there was this black tape that looked like contemporary packing tape, and we were thinking, oh no, this plate has been opened in the past. And but thank goodness Peter identified this as a type of tape that was used primarily on albums, on the spines of albums in the 1820s, and so it did fit in with our dating. So that was a huge relief. And finally, on the front of the frame, there was a label which dates to the 1860s to 80s English. And so that fits in with H.P. Robinson buying the plates and exhibiting them in Tunbridge Wells and labelling the front of the plates. So we were very relieved with all Peter's analysis of the papers. As a comparison, he worked with the Harry Ransom Centre on the first photograph and was able to confirm that the paper on the back of their plate and their frame was a French frame. So that all coordinated with our research. And also he took a look at our frames to go with the Cardinal and the Christ. And these were dated to be 1880s British writing paper on the back, and also the labels on the front are again confirmed to be 1880s British. So the evidence was leading to these frames being made in England and those plates not coming to England framed by Nieps. And so we decided we needed to authenticate the frames, where they were from and the date of the frames. So Elizabeth Cocoon from the National Gallery worked very closely with us. And she took a look at the Nieps Claire de Lune frame and identified it as French. She could tell this, by the profile and by the inner moulding of the frame. And also these keys at the back, and it was made of lime, which was the traditional French material for their frames at that period. And also the colouring, when the gilding rubbed off, there was a red tone underneath, which again was a typical French system. And she conserved the frames for us, so they all look beautiful now, ready to put the plates back into the frames. The compo of a French frame is white, so in the conservation, as you could see around the edge, she actually only just coloured in the bottom of the missing piece and kept the white compo, so future analysis they would be able to tell that it was a French compo. And here is everything beautifully conserved, ready to be put back together. Yesterday we were working at the National Gallery on how to do this, and we think the best way to re-secure the plate is by wedges, traditional wedges in pine, so that it won't react with any of the process. And Isabella confirmed that the other two frames were indeed English around the 1880s, and again she conserved those for us. And once again, we displayed those for the conference, all conserved and ready for conservation. And then finally, the story of the fingerprints. We had found fingerprints on the Cardinal and on the Christ. So when we opened up Claire de Lune, we were very excited to find fingerprints on that plate also. Philip Gilhooly explained to us about fingerprints and ridges and furrows within our fingerprints, and there was enough evidence on these fingerprints to suggest that it was the same person, but we don't have Nieps's original fingerprint to compare it with, so we can't be absolutely definite. But on the back of the Cardinal there was an etched fingerprint, which means it was also placed into the acid at the time of production, so that points to it being Nieps. He had no assistance, he worked on his own, he was inventing this process, so it's very unlikely to be anybody else's fingerprints, and because it's actually etched like the process on the front, it points to it being Nieps's fingerprint, which is really exciting. And again with Christ, they were on the back of the plates, and they were etched in again, so again made in the actual printing process, photographic process. And then finally, on our wonderful new process made with lavender, there again were examples on the corners, somebody handling it really carefully, trying to stay away from the image area. And so finally we decided all this information we would share with the photographic, scientific and conservation communities. So we held the conference in Bradford and we displayed the Nieps plates all naked here without their frames, and everybody could come and see the fingerprints, look at the processes close up. It's a really, really beautiful moment. It is quite sad to have to put them back into frames and into cases, sort of confine them again, but we need to keep them safely for posterity. So I'd like to thank you very much for coming to listen to our research outcomes. I'd like to thank all the speakers